Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I am your host as always, Steve Hall, and I'm joined today with Carl. And actually, I want to make sure, how do you pronounce your last name, Carl, before I go ahead?
Juneau. Yeah, Juneau in French.
Nice. So Carl is a exercise scientist with a PhD in physical activity epidemiology. I'll fumble that word as well. But he has also been a coach for the last 16 years, which is a really long time, and you will have a lot of experience via that. And coupled with your expertise, I have no doubt that we have a lot of things to learn from Carl. And specifically bringing Carl on to talk about something he wrote recently for Alan Aragon's research review, which was very exciting, and we were just going to explore it a little bit. But before we get into that, I think the audience probably want to hear a bit more about you, Carl, and kind of learn about your background. So feel free to kind of expand on my very limited introduction to yourself.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Thank you, Steve, for having me on. I like your podcast, and it's a privilege to be part of it now. It all started when I was 6. Seeing the movie Robin Hood made me want to do archery. So then I did archery between ages 6 and 17. And it's my archery coach that got me started lifting weights so I could pull a bow with more tension and shoot arrows straighter. And I started that at age 16. At age 17, I got a new coach. And like many young kids, athletes, I wanted to go to the Olympics. And my coach sat down with me and said, well, if that's what you want to do, you'll have to train full time. You'll do that for 10, 15 years. You'll probably never win the Olympics because no one in Canada ever did for archery. And then you'll have no education, no career, no reputation, and no money. Is this really what you want to do with your life? So I was grateful for this coach to really be straightforward with me. I thought about it a little bit, and I said, no, thank you. and I stopped doing archery. But I kept lifting weights, and I was very interested in that. I went to the counselor and found out there's a career you can make out of that. Up to that point, I didn't know about exercise sciences, and I didn't know that you could make a living and study physical activity. So I did a bachelor in that. And towards the end of my bachelor, I found out that actually so few people do the minimum of physical activity required for health that I kind of made a turn in my education towards public health. And this is where I did a master's and a PhD in public health with a specialization in epidemiology, which is basically health statistics. And I butcher the word too all the time, so don't worry about that. And at day, I would study epidemiology and do my PhD, and at night, I would work as a trainer and as a coach. And I built the largest website on building muscle in French in the world. We have over 115,000 fans on Facebook, to give you an idea. And I've coached about 4,500 people through that website. So I coach people one-on-one live, and I coach people online, and I've been training myself for a long time too. So this really kept me connected to the field. And although I've studied epidemiology, and I've learned how to promote physical activity to get people who don't do any to do a minimum, my passion has always been building muscle and training and lifting weights. So now that my studies are over, I'm kind of back to this original love. And this is, in a nutshell, what brought me to writing about effective reps and this article in the Alan Aragon's research review. So I'm happy we can talk about it today because I think that, well, some people told me, and I can picture that they would have liked to read the article, but unfortunately, they're not subscribed to the research review. So we can cover it a bit in detail. Although I would recommend anyone to get the review. I've been subscribed for a long time, and it's really priceless information. Actually, when I was in my master's, I used some of the review to do work schoolwork, and I got really good grades. So if that can motivate anyone, I would recommend it. But this is the short story.
Awesome. No, I mean, I think a lot of people can probably relate to the reason you got into weight training. I think a lot of people, I mean, probably not archery, but probably getting into something like rugby or American football or something along those lines. They need to get into the weightlifting room. And then, a lot of us realize we're not made out for the kind of being the best at a certain sport, and lifting weights is something we can do in our own time, be a bit selfish with. And it's exciting that you found a passion for it and helping other people. And I wasn't aware of your French websites. That's really exciting. And hopefully we can kind of, delve into some of that knowledge and spread it to some of the more English audience. And we will go into, and I have to agree, Alan's review. I mean, he was the founder of these sort of reviews. And so if that's anything to go by, kind of he's been doing it a long time and gets some exciting guests to do guest like articles for it. So definitely something that is priceless. So if we, first of all, I guess, get into kind of however you want to go into it, kind of defining effective reps. What was your kind of article about, kind of just wherever you want to begin with, because I don't want to get you to start defining effective reps before we get into kind of, obviously you spoke about drop sets and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, sure. If that's okay with you, I would pretty much summarize the article, and we could start with what brought me to it. And what brought me to it was one study by Prestige and all that was published in 2017 on dropped rest pause sets. And that study showed that one rest pause set was equal or superior to 3 normal sets. And it was actually superior for hypertrophy of the thigh, but otherwise equal in terms of hypertrophy. And this really surprised me. How is it possible that one set be equal to 3 normal sets? So I started using the technique in my own training, and I found that yes, the workouts were much shorter, in the order of 50% shorter, and that I was still making the same gains at the same pace. Now, I'm guessing that you have the same problem, Steve, which is that when you've been training for a long time, you don't make gains as fast as you used to. So it's hard to really compare over, say, a month or two if a new technique is giving you better results. But I thought it was giving me at least equivalent results. A client I still train, I don't train clients often anymore, but this client, I put him on the technique as well, and he got better or similar results. So it got me thinking, and I wondered how doing just one set could lead to better gains than doing 3 normal sets. And I started to gather more studies on techniques like that, like drop sets, and generally speaking, studies on training to failure. And I don't know if that happens to you as well, but it's like when it comes to lifting weights and exercise sciences in general, it's as if my brain works while I sleep, and it goes into the background, and at some point, I'm in the shower, I'm just walking outside, I'm like, oh, this is how it works, or here's an idea at least. And this is basically how it came about. So I did a small review of the literature, found a bunch of studies on training to failure, and this is basically how I came up with the theory.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, you can go with your comment.
No, I thought you were finishing a segment there. So I have questions on it, but there's obviously more to say, so go for it.
Okay. I was finishing a segment. Well, I should also credit, other people. I've and you mentioned them, so that was a great comment on your part. So other people have written about this. Borje Fagerli, whose work was not too familiar, but you mentioned him. I read about myo-reps, and he certainly proposed that drop sets would be more effective, or would be an effective way to train for building muscle. So all of this blends together and trying to, and I tried to come up with to build, on this, the research, the work of other people, and what I think I may have done that is new and a contribution is to really formalize the theory and just put it out there as a theory and say, well, look, reps closer to failure are more effective. And the reason they're more effective is, I hypothesize, is because of metabolic stress. Mm-hmm. And so we should probably train with closer to failure if we're interested in building muscle faster and building muscle in a way that's more efficient. So that in a nutshell would be the theory. If you want, I could read you the 3 points of the theory. And writing about this, it's interesting. I had to read and refresh my memory on what a theory is, because it's interesting in the exercise sciences. We really seldom talk about theory. But we do have theories. It's just that we don't call them that way. And in public health, there's a bunch of theories. And when I got into public health, I was a little behind because I didn't even acknowledge that theories existed. I was like, well, why have a theory? And just talk about stuff the way they are, and don't bore me with theories. But I learned that theories can be helpful, especially in making predictions. And I think all coaches and trainers actually have theories. Yeah. And every trainer has his own, more or less, theory about what builds muscle, what burns fat, and how to get a client to do it. But we just would not call them theories. But I went forward and called this one a theory. And a theory is just a set of logically interrelated propositions about reality. Mm-hmm. So I kept mine really short and focused. The 3 propositions are, the first one is a definition. So failure, the theory talks about failure. So I think it's important to define failure. And I took the definition of Brad Schoenfeld in his Mechanisms of Hypertrophy article from 2010. He defines failure as the point during a set when muscles can no longer produce necessary force to concentrically lift a given load. So some people would call this concentric failure. So that's the first point. The second point is that effective reps are reps closer to failure. And the third point is that the closer a rep is to failure, the more effective it is at building muscle. Yep. So that's really the core of the theory. Mm-hmm. And then now, if you want to add anything, I think that would be a good time.
Perfect. No, I think it's an exciting theory. I think theories are really exciting. I mean, just one I really like is set point theory. We know it's just a theory, but people definitely talk about it as if it's something that's kind of set in stone. But
I agree,
it's not. And but I think theories are fantastic. I think you're completely right. A lot of us do have our own theories as to why things happen or occur, and it's exciting that you've kind of introduced your own. And I think those definitions were really important and helpful. I think, just off the top of my head, and something I remember reading, as I was reading through the article, something that got to me was, I completely agree that kind of the closer you are to failure, the higher the hypertrophic stimulus. That is kind of, I think I totally agree with that from what I've known. But my concern with that would be kind of then the kind of fatigue build up as kind of we're closer to failure, fatigue rises higher, and what the implications of that might be for long-term kind of progression or long-term muscle growth, especially considering kind of how important volume is kind of being right now. And it's kind of showing that volume is quite important for hypertrophy, and whether that fatigue could end up leading to insufficient volume being produced or not as good volumes over the long term. So I don't know if you've thought about that kind of angle.
Yeah, I have. And it's an interesting point. I think it's still up to debate. What I can try and do is summarize maybe the position that's put forward a lot these days and give you my take on it. So I think I've heard Mike Zordos and Eric Helms also talk about this a lot. I like what they do. So what Mike says is you should stay far away from failure, and they use the concept of reps in reserve, and so RIR and RPE based on RIR. So Mike will say that you can train with 4 reps in the tank. So that would be an RPE of 6 on 10. And when you're training for hypertrophy, you can train with 4 reps in the tank, 3 reps in the tank, and do most of your volume that way. And he will periodize training and include weeks or mesocycles with even microcycles with fewer reps in reserve. But I think I'm not distorting his position when I say that you could spend the bulk of your hypertrophy work with 3 or 4 reps in reserve. So that's staying far away from failure. And he argues that by training that way, you'll be able to do more volume overall in the week because you won't build up as much fatigue from your workouts. So that's a good point, and I can understand that you can do more volume that way, but you'll be doing a lot of volume far from failure. And if you agree with me that reps closer to failure are more effective at building muscle, then if you're training far from failure to do more reps, yes, you're doing more volume, but is this volume as effective at building muscle as it could be? And, if we follow the theory and some of the studies on training to failure that I've reviewed, then a point could be made that you're not, that you're doing more volume, but that on average, this volume is less effective. So yes, you're training more, but is the point to train or is it to build muscle? So you're spending more time working out, but I'm not sure that at the end of the week you gave your muscles a stronger hypertrophy stimuli. So I think that both views could be entertained, and I'm not sure that at this point there's a clear-cut conclusion that can be drawn from the literature. So maybe that the best advice at this point would be to give to people would be to try both. Maybe you're someone who can handle more volume but who has a hard time going to failure all the time. So if that's you, then go with the Mike Zordos approach. And I'm mentioning Mike, but I know that many other trainers have this position. Or if you're someone who can handle failure well, and maybe you're shorter on time, so you don't really want to do more volume, you just want to do as little as you can and get the biggest bang for your buck, then try going to failure more. Another point I'd like to bring up regarding this is that you don't have to do as many sets. If one rest pause set was equal to about 3 normal sets, and one drop set was equal to about 3 normal sets in another study by Fink and colleagues in 2017. So it looks like you can do a lot less or maybe a little bit less volume and still get equal or better gains. So yes, if you're going to take a normal workout and turn all your sets into rest pause, then yes, you'll probably overdo it and overtrain and be hurting your gains. So that's definitely a no. But if you want to try it out, I would do use the equivalence of one rest pause set or one drop set equals 3 normal sets, and I would start that way. And I'm not sure that training that way would necessarily lead to overtraining. And what I've recommended in my article is that people start with one exercise. If you want to try it out, just pick one exercise that you can go to failure safely with. So that could be a machine exercise, maybe chest press, or a machine biceps exercise, or just a regular curl, and try it out. Replace 3 normal sets by 1 rest pause set. And if you see, or if you feel like you're overtraining, maybe your performance is dropping, you can slow down. If you went up to 2 rest pause sets, you can go back to 1, or you can skip a workout. There are many ways to recover. But I think that if you're an experienced trainee, or if you're a coach and you're coaching people and you see that your clients are struggling with overtraining and rest pause or drop sets, you can always take your feet off the gas and not dip into overtraining. It doesn't happen overnight, so I'm not that worried about it if you're paying attention.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's really well argued, and kind of taking everyone's point of views into account, not just kind of dogmatically going with your one way, which I really liked. And I don't know if it's probably something you've heard of from Mike Israetel, and something I've taken on board and used with my clients is the reps in reserve kind of idea, in which kind of his thoughts are 3 reps in reserve. That's kind of the minimum threshold you need to get some sort of efficacious hypertrophic stimulus. Then through your mesocycle, you kind of can, or each microcycle, take a reps in reserve down. So you go kind of 4, 3, 2, 1, and then kind of you're using kind of your maximal hypertrophic stimulus in that final week. Then you kind of would deload and recycle. So you're kind of eking out easy gains at the beginning so you can progressively overload. And I found that to be a really nice practical way to get a bit of a balance between kind of staying further away from failure, but then also getting the benefits of training towards failure. I don't know if, I guess that's something, it sounds kind of balancing it is something that you're kind of trialing at the moment as well.
Yes, I like this idea. And that would be doing a bit of both. And I can see it working. I know that Brent Schoenfeld also advocates periodizing training to failure. Yeah. So having weeks closer to failure at the end of a mesocycle, and having weeks farther away from it. So it makes a lot of sense, and there are some very skilled coaches recommending that approach. So anyone training that way is probably not far from the best possible applications that we know at this point.
And actually, I think I just want to rewind a little bit to kind of, you talked about rest pause sets, we've talked about drop sets. Do you want to just explain like the general protocol for the listeners, just because they haven't read it and they might not know exactly what we're talking about, just so they have a baseline?
Oh yeah, I would love to. I'll tell you how I do rest pause sets. I'll tell you how Prestige did them in their study, and then I'll tell you how Fink did drop sets in their study. So a rest pause set is basically a set where you do reps to failure. So let's be concrete here and give an example with 10 reps. So let's say you do 10 reps to failure, and then you will wait a little bit to rest, and then you'll do more reps to failure. You'll wait a little bit. You'll do more reps to failure, and so on. And you can do that as many times as you want. The way I do them is I try to double the initial amount of reps. So let's say I've done 10 reps. I will wait 40 seconds, and I will do, say, 4 more reps. I will wait another 40 seconds. I will do 4 more reps. Now I'm up to 8 extra reps, so I will wait another 40 seconds. I'll probably crank out 3 more. And now all these reps are to failure. So in total, I've actually done 11 extra reps. So that was 10 plus 11, 21 reps. I find that it's worth it to go to failure on the last kind of tiny set, because while you're there, why not get the extra gains? So I use 40-second rests to double the reps of my initial set. In Prestige and all, they used 20-second. They call it inter-set rest. And I found that with a very short rest like that, I could barely do 2 extra reps, and my client was the same. But we're lifting pretty heavy weights. I'm not sure about the subjects in Prestige study, but if people can try it out. But if you're using 20-second rests and you can do only 1 or 2 extra reps, your rest pause set will end up being very long. So you're not being effective that way. So I think that the 40-second option is a good compromise. About drop sets, Fink used a 20% drop. So let's do an example here. Let's say we're using 100 pounds on a leg curl exercise. We're doing 10 reps. We're going to drop the weight right away, so there's no pause, by 20%. So we're down to 80. We're going to do as many reps as we can. We're going to drop the weight again, 20%, do as many reps as we can, and so on. In both studies, they ended up doing 3 extra. So they did 3 pauses and extra reps in Prestige, and they did 3 drops in Fink. You don't have to do 3. For rest pause sets, sometimes I will go and do more than double the reps. And as I get used to the technique, for example, after 2, 3, 4 weeks, I find that my muscular endurance is increased, so that the tiny sets after the pauses are not that painful, and so I feel like I can do more, and I think that's a good way to progressively overload and ink out more muscle gain from the technique. So that could also be periodized. Say in the first or 2 weeks, we could go with 3 pauses and then go with 4 pauses and maybe 5 pauses at the end of a mesocycle, and then cycle back to 2 or even straight sets, normal sets for the first week of the new mesocycle that could be seen as a recovery mesocycle, and then start doing rest pause or drop sets again. And for drop sets, that would be dropping the weight, 2, 3, 4, even 5 times. It's been shown that sets to failure with lighter weights cause more damage. And that makes sense. If you can't curl a pencil anymore, it means you've really destroyed your muscle. So it's the same idea, and it's a way to progressively overload as you keep training by dropping more weight off, then you're damaging your muscles more, and so that's another way to overload.
Okay. No, fantastic. They sound very similar. If people are familiar with myo-reps, it's kind of a similar, but it's like changing a few of the variables, which is really cool and exciting. And it shows this, when we're talking about metabolite increases and getting the pump and things like this, there's loads of people have loads of different methods for it. I think I've heard muscle rounds is one I've heard from Dr. Scott Stevenson. He's got some methods there. So I'm really glad you touched on how to kind of periodize it and progressively overload it, because that is something I did want to ask. And you kind of talked about adding sets. So that's one way of doing it. And then I guess there could be multiple other ways, but kind of adding sets is an important one of doing it, because you are going to get better at it. As we know, the body adapts. Have you found, is there a period of time that you can kind of use this for? Or have you found like after a couple of months or a couple of mesocycles of using such an approach, it kind of loses its effect a little bit? Have you found that at all? I'm not sure.
I haven't been using it for long enough.
Okay.
in my experience, which is limited to maybe 4 or 5 months, I would say that it hasn't lost its effectiveness. And looking at the science, I don't see why it would. You know, this theory still needs to be refined, but
so guys, massive apologies. We had some technical difficulties in which I lost my chat to Carl, but luckily we covered a lot within our discussion, and I want to say a massive thank you for staying tuned and a massive thank you to Carl. And he just had some points he wanted me to reiterate towards the end as we were having our discussion. He says, so basically I was saying that I can see myself training with rest pause or drop sets for life. And to prevent overtraining, I just reduced my volume by doing fewer rest pause sets so that he's still able to train to failure, but reducing volume, and that should hopefully prevent overtraining. And so far in his experience, it has done. He says that way, my training is much more effective and efficient, and I spend less time in the gym. And for him right now, that is a priority as he has a lot going on within his life. So he'd also like to mention that he is currently developing an AI phone app. So this app is going to kind of learn from you and utilize such tools as the effective reps via rest pause sets and make your training hopefully more effective and potentially more efficient as well. And that's very exciting. And he actually said he has an offer as well for us and everyone listening, and says what I'd like to do is offer everyone listening their first month free to see if they just want to check out the app. And so if you'd like to learn more about starting to build muscle faster using the AI that he's developing and get your first month free because you're listening to this podcast, which is fantastic, he has provided a link which will be down below so you can get onto it. And I want to read this out because I think it's important. He also said, and that's it. Thanks a lot, seriously. And it was a great interview. Again, he really enjoys the podcast and make sure to mention it to people because he really appreciates everything we're doing at Revive Stronger. And again, I want to thank Carl for coming onto the show and providing the knowledge that he has. And like always, all of the guests. And the podcast couldn't be possible without all of you listeners being here. So I'm glad that I'm able to provide you a free month to Carl's app, which is super exciting. And if you do have any questions, I'm sure Carl would be more than happy to come on again and discuss things once I do have access to the internet. So definitely get them down below and we might be able to get them on and talk more about this sort of thing. And I will leave it there, guys. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for bearing with me and revive stronger and take care.